Okay. ¿Se puede ver? Can you see that? Okay, perfect.
Sí, sin problema.
Un minuto. Ok, Bárbara, vamos.
Listo, estamos en vivo.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third virtual lecture on Korean Studies organized by the International Program of Korean and East Asian Studies of the University of Costa Rica. This is Filippo Costantini, and I'm the coordinator of this program. Today, we are really honored to have two important international guests, Prof. Antonio Fiori from the Asian Institute of the University of Bologna, and Eduardo Luciano Tadeo of the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico. Professor Fiori will share with us his research presenting the lecture Kim Jong-un, North Korea, a 10-year assessment. And Professor Tadeo will help us to start the discussion before the Q&A session. Before introducing Professor Fiori, I remind you that this lecture is the last conference of the cycle for this semester, and we will start with a new cycle from next September. I also remind you that this lecture is broadcasted in the YouTube channel of the Instituto de Investigación Filosófica of the University of Costa Rica. And you can leave comments, greetings, and questions in the same channel and in the Facebook pages of the School of Philosophy of the University of Costa Rica and our, of course, Facebook page, which is called PSA. Let me introduce Professor Fiori. Antonio Fiori is Associate Professor of History and Institution of Asia at the Department of Political and Social Sciences of the University of Bologna in Italy, and President of the Asian Institute. He has been a visiting scholar at the United International College of Zhuhai, the East-West Center Honolulu, and the Pyongyang Institute for Korean Studies, Seoul National University. In the last 10 years, he has been continuously engaged in teaching activities in several universities of the Republic of Korea, Hanguk University of Foreign Studies, Korea University, Iowa Women's University. His research interests focus on inter-Korean relations and North Korea domestic and foreign policy. Among his recent publications, the Routledge Handbook of Europe-Korean Relations, Routledge 2022, and the Korean Paradox, Domestic Political Divide and Foreign Policy in South Korea, Routledge 2019. Welcome, Professor Fiori. Thank you for being here.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much for having me today. It's very nice actually to be here. I would like to express my gratitude to both Filippo and Eduardo. I must confess it's the first time that I lecture for a Latin American university, and this is, very exciting. So I really hope it's not the last time anyway. I would like to share my screen actually in order, because I have a presentation for today. So I really hope that you can see my slides. Well, actually, what I would like to do today with you is, talking about Kim Jong-un and, eventually if and to what extent actually North Korea has changed under his rule, because we have come, in the last few months, actually exactly in April, we have come to celebrate the first 10 years of Kim Jong-un's rule. So I think that this is a very good occasion to understand, something more about his rule and, how eventually he is contributing to modify his country, or, eventually what kind of political strategy he is playing. So I have titled my presentation Kim Jong-un's North Korea 10-year assessment. And, my introduction is very easy. I would actually like to start saying that, in April, on the 12th of April, we have celebrated the 10th anniversary of Kim Jong-un's rule in North Korea. Actually, as you probably know, Kim Jong-il, his father, died in December, exactly on 17th of December 2011. But actually, Kim Jong-un officially seized power in April 2012 by becoming the first secretary of the party. So that's why actually we do take into consideration 10 years time span from 2012. When he became the leader, we basically knew nothing about him. We didn't have any pictures of him apart from one that actually depicted Kim Jong-un as a very, young child. And basically, the only thing that we knew was that, he had been educated in Switzerland. But actually, this is something that has always happened with, young Kims. Okay, both him and his brother actually started in Switzerland. So, he was very young when he seized power in 2012. He was more or less 27. I'm saying more or less because, of course, we still ignore how old is he exactly. So he might be 27 and he should be around 38 nowadays. And on top of that, actually, he was pretty much unexperienced. That's a matter of fact. He had no experience at all. And, actually, this comes out of something that we need to understand, because we have had two different transitions in North Korea, right? The first one actually was from Kim Il-sung to Kim Jong-il, and it happened in 1994, actually, when the father of the nation died. And the second one is the one I'm talking about today. But, if we do compare the two transitions, actually what we discover, very vividly is basically the fact that unlike the first transition, which was pretty much prepared, actually Kim Jong-il had a lot of time to prepare himself actually to seize power after his father. Unlike these, in occasion of the second transition, Kim Jong-un had no time at all, because of course, actually, North Korea was caught by surprise when Kim Jong-il died in 2011. He suffered from a stroke in 2008, and possibly until that point, he had never taken into consideration the possibility of transition of power. But that was the moment when eventually Kim Jong-il started to understand that he needed to choose among his sons who could be the one, to eventually succeed him. Okay, and I will get back to this point very soon. When Kim Jong-un actually became the leader in North Korea, many scholars, many pundits, many commentators and journalists, actually everybody started to talk about what was the future of North Korea, what could be the future of North Korea, okay? according to some commentators, actually, because Kim Jong-un was unexperienced, what could happen was a military coup, which of course actually had to be organized by armed forces. According to somebody else, actually, there could be a regime collapse. So, kind of power struggle among different elites, and eventually this could bring the regime itself on the verges of collapse. And according to somebody else, actually, the fact that Kim Jong-un had lived in Europe could be beneficial to North Korea, meaning that it could eventually lead his country to, the implementation of liberal reforms, and eventually to modify the nature of the political regime in North Korea. To tell you the truth, I have no proofs actually to offer you, but I was totally convinced that actually, North Korea was undergoing any changes. Okay, I was totally convinced that actually Kim Jong-un would rule his country as his father and grandfather had done before him. Okay. If I have been studying North Korea for 25 years now, and actually when you study the country for so much time, actually you do understand that the country actually suffers, if you want, or is affected from some kind of repetitions in its political life. And so actually I was convinced that nothing was going to change. What we can say actually, coming to to the same country and the same leader after 10 years, actually we can say that eventually Kim Jong-un has effectively consolidated his power. He has basically established him as a strong dictator, and basically there has not been throughout the 10 years talking of any kind of regime instability. But of course, there have been political changes or changes in the political system. And this is something that I would like to highlight. I would like to really stress, because actually those who think that, North Korea actually is a kind of monolith, are totally wrong. And of course, he has transformed himself into a skillful leader. And I'm saying so because, of course, we have seen actually some of the actions, diplomatic actions that actually have happened or have taken place under Kim Jong-il, like the two official meetings with President Trump, in Singapore first and in Hanoi later, and several meetings with Moon Jae-in, South Korean president, and several meetings with Xi Jinping, Chinese president. So actually, he has become kind of a diplomatic leader. And actually, I would like to briefly talk about what I consider, three different stages of in Kim Jong-il's rule. So the first one, from actually 2012 to 2017, is based on the consolidation of his power. And of course, actually, we need to talk about the implementation of the Byongjin line, which is, the official strategy that eventually Kim Jong-un has implemented. The second is, actually marked by economic development, but also by diplomatic opening of the country. And when we talk about diplomatic opening of the country, we need to understand that actually North Korea implements this kind of strategy in order to give, stability to the external environment. This is a very, very clear and very, very important message, okay? Stability actually is pretty much important in order to nurture, actually, if you want, nuclear, ambitions. And the third stage is eventually something that has recently happened, that is reversing the measures that had previously been undertaken. Eventually relying again on self-reliance and state-centrism. When I talk about self-reliance, actually, of course, I'm talking about the North Korean, basic philosophy that is Chute. And, I'm also eventually mentioning the fact that, recently speaking, actually, the regime has tightened social and ideological control in order to deter potential domestic instability because of some reasons that, I will clarify in a few minutes. So these are the three different steps that I would touch on. Okay, let's start with these. As I said, actually, when he became the leader, he, was very weak. Okay, and eventually, the weak power base, was something that we all examined and analyzed. Okay, the transition, if you study, regime transitions, actually, especially dictatorships, you know very well how, important and how weak the regime itself can be during transition periods. Okay, so that was a very important problem for North Korea. So it could not start from the same base as his father. What he did actually was basically modifying everything. So why am I talking about reshuffling political and military apparatuses? Because eventually he wanted to be flanked by men he could trust. Actually, he didn't want to rely on the same officers or the same politicians that had helped and supported his father, because he didn't know to what extent actually he could trust these people. So what he did was, after a couple of years, basically in 2013, what he did was reshuffling the apparatuses by, eventually demoting old people and promoting new people that could legitimize him and be very much, how to say, inclined to trust him. Okay. But what is important, and why I put this picture here, it's not very clear, but I'm sure that eventually you are recognizing the man over there. What is important is basically the fact that since more or less 2009, actually he started, his father actually started to think about the possibility that Kim Jong-un could be the next leader. And since his father actually was pretty much aware of the fact that his son was, totally unexperienced, what happened was the creation of the so-called support group. Okay, the support group was basically, formed by three people. Okay, the one you are seeing here was Chan Son-taek, okay, who was killed in 2013. And then the second person was Kim Kyung-ri, wife of Chan Son-taek and actually sister of Kim Jong-il. And the third person was Che Ryong-ge. Che Ryong-ge was a general, okay? Still, he is one of the most important military man in North Korea nowadays. He is the chairman of the Standing Committee of the Supreme People's Assembly. So in order to translate, actually, is the second in North Korea by importance. At that time, actually, Tae was vice chairman of the Central Military Committee. Okay, now what was the role of these three people? Actually, they needed to support and prepare Kim Jong-un in order to, in order for Kim Jong-un actually to be skilled enough to rule over his country after his father. Okay, so that's why we are talking about the support group, which was disbanded, totally disbanded between 2013 and 2014. Okay, Chan Son-taek was killed. His auntie actually disappeared. She has not been killed, but actually she has been marginalized. And Chae is actually the only one who is still cooperating with Kim Jong-un. But that moment, actually, and these three people were very important in order to legitimize and in order to educate, if you want, Kim Jong-un to be the next leader. During these actually this extended period of time, basically Kim Jong-un also revealed some traits of his character. Okay, personal character and political character. Actually, the fact that he killed Chan Son-taek in 2013 was pretty much important for the life of the North Korean regime. Actually, what we tend to believe is that Chan Son-taek was plotting against Kim Jong-un, along with some people in China. Okay, some scholars actually suggest that eventually the previous president of the PRC, Hu Jintao, was, eventually involved. Or the prime minister Wen Jiabao was involved, or at least they knew what was happening. But actually, what we tend to believe is that Chan Son-taek was plotting against Kim Jong-un, and Kim Jong-un eventually had no problems whatsoever in, killing him. Okay. And this is pretty much important in political terms because, these started to make us believe, to make us think that he was working towards his personal consolidation once, his father had died. Okay. The other important point happened in 2016, and what happened was the 7th Party Congress of the Korean Workers' Party. Okay, first of all, it was pretty much important because there had been no Congress in 36 years. Okay, so this was pretty much important because actually this demonstrated again that after having consolidated his role in North Korea, eventually he wanted to bring to the very core of the political system of the country the party again, because what his father had done was relying on armed forces and eventually marginalizing the role of the party. But, eventually for Kim Jong-un, the party was pretty much important. And, actually he needed to bring the party to its original importance again. Okay, so there was a kind of correction in policy between Kim Jong-un and his father. Okay. All right. Now, when we talk about Kim Jong-un, actually, we also need to understand that if we do compare him to his father or to his grandfather, actually, and I'm sure that you are pretty much aware of this, he has adopted a very different leadership style. Okay, his father, I'm sure you do remember his father, but his father was very solitary man. Okay, he was, there are many scholars actually have written on Kim Jong-il by eventually trying to investigate his psychological details, okay, psychological attitudes. He was a very solitary man. He was a very introspective man. His grandfather, Kim Jong-un's grandfather, was very different in terms of personal attitudes, but of course, times were very different. Okay. The leadership style of Kim Jong-un, is eventually totally different from his predecessors. Okay, he has relied and he has transformed the leadership because we basically see him. It's very easy that he goes around Pyongyang, he goes around, the country. He has become a so-called public persona. And eventually, what else we can say about his leadership? That basically he has revealed a very high degree of pragmatism, a very high degree of transparency, a very high degree of institutionalization, all characteristics that actually did not belong to his father. Okay, Kim Jong-un eventually has no problems whatsoever in giving public speeches. Okay, his father had a lot of problems because he was, not a very good speaker. And eventually, Kim Jong-un wants to be always seen as a leader to whom actually people can relate. His father didn't want to be approached. He didn't want to be approached by people in general. Okay, that's why I said he was a solitary man. Okay, he went around, but actually wanted people to be distanced. Okay, Kim Jong-un is totally different. He wants actually to be overwhelmed by the internal audience. Okay, and we have thousands of pictures that actually testify this kind of attitude that he has. Okay. The other point that I would like to raise is that, if you spend your time, like I do spend my time actually reading and rereading public speeches and, all the speeches that eventually are published by the Nodong Shinmun mass media in North Korea, you do understand that eventually, for the first time, actually, Kim Jong-un has no problems in pointing out the difficulties that eventually the country is going through. This is, totally new, brand new. He prefers actually to to transfer these problems to put actually these problems on the table and eventually socialize these problems that the country has on the table, in order to make the population understand what kind of problems the country is going through, rather than concealing these difficulties. Okay, and again, this is totally new. This is another new characteristic that eventually he has adopted during his leadership. Okay, and another again as being the regularization of the party congress in several meetings that eventually he held with officials in North Korea, and various leadership meetings that he's always having with people in in North Korea. Again, this means that actually, or gives the impression, if you wish, that decision making has become a kind of collective process. I'm not saying that actually, very important decisions like, performing a test, a nuclear test, or launching a missile eventually do not depend on the leader. Those are decisions that eventually the leader takes. But, when it comes to economic policies or, these kind of things that can be implemented in the country, actually what we tend to believe is that, he wants to understand what others in the leadership circle think. And the other important point is actually the fact that he has adopted a different strategy compared to his father, okay? The new strategy called Byongjin is eventually translated as simultaneous development. What are we talking about? Well, actually, Kim Jong-un has always said that eventually what was important for his country were two pillars, okay? The first one was reforming economy, or making, economy works for the sake of the population. The other pillar was eventually, represented by the development of the nuclear arsenal. Okay, so I'm not giving up with nukes. What I'm doing is eventually bringing my country to the next stage in order to make people, to make the international community know that, what I'm doing is serious. I want actually everybody to know that if they dare attack me, actually I can retaliate by eventually relying on a very broad nuclear arsenal. Okay, and this is Byongjin. Of course, actually, at the very beginning, what he had in mind was trying to legitimize himself and his role by reforming economics and eventually giving more to the people. Okay. Some reforms were implemented, not very useful reforms. The recognition of emerging markets actually was pretty much important, but that was done on the purpose of eventually, getting hard currency from abroad, or decentralization of agriculture, or eventually the building of economic zones. Actually, 20 economic development zones were implemented through the implementation of a new law. Okay, what happened? What happened was that eventually, unexpectedly, if you want, actually North Korea started to grow from the economic point of view. Okay, as you can see there, in 2016, Pyongyang had reached 3.9%. This was the peak, the highest point the country had reached in the last 17 years. And this was pretty much the success of Kim Jong-un. However, on a different note, if you want, actually, Kim Jong-un and the leadership have always been, obsessed, or if you want, actually, they have always relied on the centrality of nuclear and missile weapon program. Okay, we can talk in the during the Q&A about these specifically, but of course, actually, nukes and missile launches in the missile program actually have always been at the very core of the North Korean political regime. And of course, actually, these two things, economic reforms, in economic development, and the arsenal, are very, very only difficult. Only very difficultly actually can go along together. Okay, it's very difficult because, as we know, actually, these countries spend something like 40% of the GDP in weapons. Okay, so implementing economic reforms actually becomes very, very, very hard. And then what he has done from the diplomatic point of view. In the first 6 years, so more or less up until 2017, this was one of the two peaks. The first one was in 2013, the other one was in 2017. Actually, everybody was totally convinced of the fact that there could be a war confrontation between North Korea and the South and the United States, of course. But in the first 6 years, actually, what it did was eventually having this kind of isolationist approach, okay, that basically means Kim Jong-un didn't go anywhere, and he refused to meet foreign diplomats, foreign delegations. He basically wanted to be isolated, okay, for specific reasons eventually. And the other point here, when we talk about diplomacy, is also the fact that eventually up to 2017-18, the relationship with China was absolutely not good. We always talk, scholars actually always talk about this intimate relationship that exists between Pyongyang and Beijing. What I can tell you is eventually the fact that from the economic point of view, actually it exists a very, very strong relationship, but from the political point of view, things are totally different. We need actually to free our minds from the fake message according to which actually China controls North Korea. From the political point of view, it doesn't exist. It's not like that, okay? We didn't have good relations with Washington and Seoul, and we didn't have good relations with Beijing. Okay, why? Because actually, Kim Jong-un decided to launch missiles, to have this kind of very, very vocal and confrontational attitude against Donald Trump. He performed nuclear tests. The last one actually was performed in 2017. And of course, China was not entirely happy of how Kim Jong-un was behaving, because China as well actually needs the region to be stable. Otherwise, Beijing is not free to do what it wants. Okay. So there was a kind of deterioration in the relations between Beijing and Pyongyang. As you can see, actually, the first visit to China was in 2018. Kim Jong-un visited China for the first time in 2018, and eventually that was done on purpose because eventually he was going to meet Donald Trump for the first time. So he wanted, before meeting with Donald Trump, actually, he wanted to, get eventually the suggestions that Xi Jinping could give him. Okay, and the second phase, I will try to be a bit faster, but actually the first phase was probably the most important one. But we need to understand what kind of changes have affected, if you want, North Korea. The second phase is pretty much important as well. January 2018. What happens in January during the New Year's speech? What happens is that Kim Jong-un announces the conclusion of the Byonjin policy. Okay, why? Because according to him, actually, North Korea at that point had already transformed itself into a state nuclear force, and this has been put in the constitution as well. And what he needed to do, starting from that moment, actually, was to rebalance national strategy, focusing on economic development. Okay, so the binary
the binary Byongjin policy could not exist any longer because eventually these pillar had been completed, so North Korea had to focus on the other one. Okay, the other important point was actually the abolition of the Songun ideology from the constitution. The Songun ideology, as I said, his father had completely relied on armed forces, okay? And the Songun actually was his father's strategy, okay? Songun can be translated as military first, okay? So military first and then the rest of the population. If actually you want me to translate this policy in a very brutal way, this also meant at the very end of 1994-95, actually, when North Korea was affected by this, huge dramatic famine, actually this was the ideology, and this meant, I need to feed soldiers first, and then I do not actually I don't necessarily need to spend my money to feed my population. I mean, if they die, I don't care. As long as I feed soldiers, it's okay. Okay, this was the ideology that Kim Jong-il, his father, had. Okay, and of course, this can be understood because it was legitimized by armed forces. Okay, but Kim Jong-un does not need this kind of ideology, and of course, actually, this is erased from the constitution. And on top of that, in addition to that, actually, what he did was, eventually introducing the concept of people first. Okay, people first is kind of explosion in North Korea. I mean, putting people at the very core of the country itself is, of course, we can still be talking about propaganda, but again, actually, launching this slogan was pretty much important in order to understand Kim Jong-un's attitude. And, eventually, actually, what was important here was the reprioritization of resource allocation. Okay, resources actually had to be allocated for the sake of people. Look, this was the moment when actually money started to be spent on the modernization of Pyongyang. And in fact, actually, if you go to Pyongyang nowadays, you do see that the city has been reshaped, remodeled in a certain sense. More cars and more buildings, and everything seems more modern than it was years and years ago. Okay. And from the diplomatic point of view, what happened was actually that Kim Jong-un decided that he needed to, eventually make a step. What was the step, actually? There was an occasion, a specific occasion that you can see in the picture. That was, Pyeongchang Olympic Games. Okay, Winter Olympic Games that were to be held in Pyeongchang in South Korea. Actually, that was the moment when Pyongyang launched its charm offensive. Okay, basically, Kim Jong-un was invited by South Korea to let North Koreans to go to Pyeongchang and participate in Winter Olympics. That not happened. Only the women's hockey team was sent from North Korea, but they sent delegations and cheerleaders, and actually this was a clear success. And this was also the moment when actually Kim Jong-un decided to play his diplomatic cards by reaching out, other countries. Okay, so he opened to South Korea. He opened to China, as we have seen. He opened to the United States by reaching out to Donald Trump, actually, and being reached out by Donald Trump. Okay, there was the first meeting in Singapore. The first meeting actually according to many scholars, was a success. According to me, was nothing, but actually this was a success according to many. The good point was actually that finally we found the United States and North Korea, sitting at the same table talking, and that was very, very important. One of the consequences of these was the moratorium that actually North Korea self-imposed on nuclear tests and ICBM tests. Okay, it has ended, at least from the point of view of ICBM tests, and probably very soon also the nuclear tests moratorium will be ended. And then actually, what do we have here? Actually, this is a very nice picture. I like it very much because it actually tells you what were the attitude, what were, the attitudes that actually these people had when they met for the first time in Hanoi in February 2019. I mean, they were not happy. And in fact, actually, the second summit was a failure. Okay, it was a failure because of many reasons. If actually you want, I can go back to these during the Q&A. But this basically the failure of Hanoi summit actually convinced Kim to move back to his foreign policy approach towards a kind of confrontational attitude towards both the US and South Korea. And in fact, actually, we have had basically no intercourse between these countries in the last 2.5 years. Okay. On top of that, actually, the economy has deteriorated over the last 3 years. Okay, because there are so many problems. Okay, so many problems. The first one is the imposition of sanctions against North Korea. So the United Nations Security Council basically has imposed so many sanctions that eventually North Korea has become very, very, very difficult to overcome these sanctions. And of course, in the last couple of years, actually, the pandemic and natural disasters. Okay, so this has brought to a very, very pronounced reduction in international trade, especially with China. Eventually, what is important here, I didn't put actually a picture of Kim Jong-un crying and eventually apologizing in front of his people, but this has happened. And when he cried, actually, he apologized because of the failure of the economic program, of the economic reforms that he wanted to implement, and he was not successful because of this and that, because of the United States, because of sanctions, because of this and that. But actually, he cried and he asked his citizens to tighten the belts to survive the economic hardship. So this is the so-called arduous march that eventually Kim Jong-un asked for. Okay, and then the third stage, and then conclusions. I think I have only a couple of slides more, 2 or 3 slides more. So I'll try to cut it short. But eventually, what has happened in July 2021 during the eighth Party Congress is basically the adoption of a new national strategy. Okay, what Kim Jong-un has done is eventually trying to go back to the origins. Okay, so what he did was reintroducing the Byonjin line on the one hand. So again, economic reforms and advancement of nukes and missiles, and the the old-fashioned state socialist approach on the other hand. So this is eventually what he's trying to do. Why? Because according to him, actually, this level, this degree of ideological awareness needs to be re-enhanced, if you want, and actually is also calling back to the non-socialist and anti-socialist practices, because eventually, this kind of changing strategy is eventually, depending on the fact that actually. He has noticed that something needs to be changed. Okay, otherwise, the legitimation of his role and legitimation of the King family can, eventually be, suffer. Okay. The new policy focuses on achieving the self-reliance. So that's why we are again talking about a return to tutte. Tutte is the self-reliance policy, and centralizing the economy. Okay. So the policies that had been implemented 6 years before have been reversed. And actually, probably is also trying to reconfigure the leadership or the state's relations with private entrepreneurs who have become quite, rich and quite important for the economy of North Korea. But actually, this does not mean that eventually they are part of the state. And what he wants to do is eventually reprioritizing rural development. Now, in order to come to an end, actually, I would also like to highlight the fact that there have been some, high-level personnel reshuffles. Again, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, for example, actually has been changed only 8-9 days ago. And these also mean that eventually he wants to re-strengthen control over the party and state apparatuses. In order to do that, he has also created new institutions that eventually, are a good tool in order to suppress internal discontent. For example, he created the Department of Rule Investigation and the Department of Justice. And this department, of course, actually needs to take care of, possible social unrest. I'm not going to say that eventually there's any possibility that this happens, but of course they need to take care of this possibility. And of course, again, ideological education has become very central, and social control has become eventually again very, very important. Okay. This has also basically been seen because of the extensive crackdown of foreign content that has happened very recently in North Korea. So actually, you are condemned to 15 years of correctional labor for just watching South Korean videos, okay? Which is pretty kind of widespread in North Korea. It's not actually legal, but it's widespread. And of course, as you all know, actually, North Korea has closed its borders with the People's Republic of China, more importantly, and with Russia because of COVID-19. And of course, this has meant that in the last couple of years, conditions have become pretty dramatic in the country. But again, the priority has become again, the nuclear arsenal and the missile program. Okay, Kim Jong-un has tested something like, if I do remember well, 33 missiles from the beginning of 2022, 18 or 19 different launches. So they are potentially preparing for a new nuclear test. This means that eventually, they are always pretty much focused on the development of the arsenal. And actually, we have basically seen no modifications whatsoever in North Koreans' attitude after President Biden assumed office in Washington. I must say that actually President Biden in the very beginning had a very kind of confrontational attitude towards North Korea. Then, Americans actually said that eventually they would talk to North Korea without any preconditions. But actually, what has happened is that North Korea doesn't want to go back to the table any longer, and especially now that we do have a conservative president in South Korea. And I'm sorry. And then conclusions. Okay, I have only one slide left and 2 minutes. So according to me, Kim Jong-un has consolidated his power, and eventually he was very able to do that. He was a very young man who turned himself into a leader, and even without knowing how the political machine works, actually, he consolidated his power. He became a very, very, central leader for North Korea. And of course, actually, a huge part of his legitimacy has been built on the developments that both the nuclear and missile programs have made. Okay. But these, unlike his father, especially, this has been, this has been brought about by also eventually eyeing the diplomatic factor. Okay, that is, okay, I am developing the nuclear arsenal, the missile program, but on the other side, actually, I'm trying, due to the threat that eventually I do represent, I'm also, being very successful on the diplomatic front. And in fact, actually, this has been witnessed by the 2 meetings that Kim Jong-un has had with the President of the United States. Okay. He has also, according to me, actually worked in the direction of, improving the living conditions of the people, and the people first politics actually slogan is there to tell us, how he's working in this direction. And eventually, the fact that Kim Jong-un has tightened control, as I have tried to demonstrate in the 3rd phase, is also dependent on the fact that actually he was not successful in improving the conditions of economy in North Korea. And these, according to some commentators, actually could undermine his legitimacy, domestically speaking, political stability in North Korea, and all these things. Okay. And that's all. I could eventually stop here. I'm glad again that Eduardo can offer me comments, and then after that I would be pretty much happy to give you, if you want to pose me questions, I would be happy to try to give an answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Thank you for sharing with us your long experience on the topic and your knowledge. And I'm sure there will be plenty of questions. But before that, I would like to introduce Professor Eduardo Luciano Tadeo to push the discussion. So Eduardo Luciano Tadeo Hernández has a PhD in communication. He is currently an assistant professor and postdoctoral researcher in the Department of International Studies at the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City. He studied international relations at UPAEP, Mexico, and later specialized in Korean studies at El Colegio de Mexico. He is a co-founder of the Mexican Circle of Korean Studies, a member of the Eurasia Study Group, a member of the North American Cultural Diplomacy Initiative, and a collaborator at the Globalitica think tank. He has worked as a political advisor in Mexican Congress and in an academic cooperation project between Mexico and Germany, Entre Espacios. His lines of research are public and cultural diplomacy of diaspora and non-state actors, gender and cyberspaces issues, communication and international relations, with a focus on Mexico and Korea. Welcome, Eduardo, Professor Tadeo, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Professor Filippo Costantini, for this invitation. I'm truly honored to be able to comment, to give some ideas about Professor Antonio Fiori presentation, who is, as we have already seen, an expert on North Korean issues. It gives me more pleasure because North Korea, the discussion of the North Korean regime seems not to be still a priority in academia in Latin America, but I am assuming this is happening worldwide, right? This is not exclusive of Latin America. But then we have the opportunity now to engage in a sort of global network of Korean studies to start moving forward the conversation about the regime. There are certain aspects about the presentation of Professor Antonio Fiori that I have identified as common trends in the discussion of the North Korean regimes. And there are other arguments that seem to be a surprise to me, because I have not seen this interpretation of the regime in most of interpretations by scholars in Latin America, at least. First of all, I am really glad that Professor Antonio Fiori has approached to the North Korean case with a critical perspective, meaning that he's not necessarily emphasizing how unique or how exclusive is the discussion of North Korea in terms of the transitions and also in terms of the continuity or change in the regime. So Professor Fiori is actually stating, as from what I am interpreting, that North Korea, as might be any other country in the world, changing constantly. And what we need to do then is identify what are the drivers for those changes, right? So I was asking myself some questions when he was putting on the table the argument of this constant change in North Korea. For instance, who makes the change possible? Is it exclusively the leader? Is it the political structure? Or is it perhaps a combination of the social reality of North Korea, political reality of North Korea, and the international system? So the first idea that I would like to bring to the discussion is that perhaps we need an intermestic approach when discussing about the North Korean changes. Certainly, there are particular national things happening, as Professor Fiori has already explained, but there is also the context of East Asia, the presence or the competition between United States and China that is necessarily also affecting the Korean Peninsula as a whole, not only the North Korean issue. And I believe that's something that we need to take into account. Now, I would like to mention certain aspects that might contribute to this debate about the change, possible change in North Korea and how this is taking place. First of all, I do agree that clearly there is a maintenance of the Juche ideology as a leading principle of the regime under Kim Jong-un's government. Actually, we can see this in cultural policy. Take as an example, the North Korean art that is promoted or the North Korean cinema that is promoted during the Kim Jong-un regimes, or the educational policy. Juche as an ideology is taught in basic education in North Korea, but is also used as an element for international dialogue between North Korea and other countries. I'm referring here to, for example, what the Kim Il-sung University does. They even have nowadays, as far as I'm concerned, a distance learning created for those interested in Juche ideology to enter and study this perspective, conducted by this university in North Korea. Also, this ideology is affecting foreign policy. Now I am thinking, for instance, about cultural diplomacy, which is something, it's a discussion that we can have, whether if North Korea has a cultural diplomacy implementing Juche ideology, or if they just make propaganda when they relate abroad, right? But just to give an example, I'm thinking about this project of the Angkor Panorama Museum that was built by the North Korean artists in Cambodia, imposed by the North Korea government, which is also a way in which the North Korea government tries to collect money in international relations. And I believe this is just an example on how in this is a debatable, as I mentioned, cultural diplomacy activities, they are also implementing Juche ideology in the relation, in the conversation with other countries. This gives me the opportunity to refer to this idea proposed by Professor Fiori about the image of North Korea changing during the time of the government of Kim Jong-un. If I'm not mistaken, he mentioned that North Korea's international status have improved during this period. That argument seemed to me very interesting, because most of the interpretations from scholars is actually that there is a constant negative image of the regime overseas. And my question is, when we talk about this improved international status of North Korea, who in the international system actually believes that there is an improvement, or that North Korea can be thought about in positive terms? I am certainly considering that not necessarily might be the case of the United States. I mean, constantly thinking of North Korea from that perspective, but that gave me the opportunity to perhaps mention that indeed there are countries in the international system that sees North Korea as a very viable political regime. And I'm thinking about some African countries and some countries from Southeast Asia that actually made business with North Korea in the military sector and in other sectors in general. So there are countries indeed that believe that North Korea has a good image and that is positive, the kind of policy they have to deal with international actors. Other element that I would like to mention that I believe is a part of the continuity in the regime is the family leadership that I believe remains fundamental for the North Korea regime. Let's think, for instance, about Kim Jo-jong, the sister of the current leader of North Korea, who now has been very visible in certain inter-Korean dialogues, but also is one of the most important promoters. Actually, she's in charge of the publicity and information department that, as Professor Fiori has mentioned, plays a very important role in the regime. I believe one of the distinguished also aspects of Kim Jong-un's ruling is the use of media both nationally and internationally in order to advance its national North Korean national interest. I have, for instance, observed during this time how during times of crisis, the North Korean media, Northern Shinmun, and also the Korean Central News Agency have played a crucial role in promoting the government's discourse of having the capability and the willingness to exercise military force if necessary. And you know, international media reproduces this discourse. So I believe that's a very effective strategy, communication strategy by the North Korean government. Now, let me mention something about the current situation of the regime, because I believe this is fundamental to clearly understand, as Professor Fiori has already mentioned, why there has been certain turns in the North Korean policy by Kim Jong-un in the past 2 years, being the most important one, I believe, the returning to the politics of Pyongyang, where clearly creating more nuclear capabilities and military defenses seems to be at the top of the priorities of the government of Kim Jong-un. Taking that into account, I believe that would be a great challenge for the regime in the future. This concentration, once again, on the military issues, taking into account that because of the COVID-19 pandemic and all the sanctions that have been imposed to the regime, it's becoming very difficult, as I see it, for the regime to better the economic situation in the country. Just to give you certain data that might help in the discussion, in 2020, when we started with the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw an important decrease of investment from the investment by China. Like around 80% of the investment decreased in North Korea. And I believe that would be in the short run, or that would be an element that would have a great impact in the North Korean economy. Also, the fact that less and less possibilities for the international commerce to move products around, you know, it seems to, even military products, I mean, seems to be also another element that would make the North Korean economy be in difficult times in the near future. Nevertheless, it seems to be, and I agree with Professor Fiori in these regards, the returning to Pyongyang a way to legitimize the possible economic struggles in the country and reinforce the political stability, which seems to be the biggest concern of the government today. How to maintain political stability, even though there are all of these situations that are making hard for North Korea, you know, to maintain that stability in the near future. Other element that is related to this policy is the implications for the international relations of North Korea of continuing with this military-based approach. We have seen that in this year, in 2022. If you remember, we saw some launching of missiles at the beginning of the year, and there was, as has happened before, an international concern about the North Korean military program, and even this was taken to the UN Security Council in May recently. Remember that the US tried to impose more sanctions to North Korea just to be stopped, that intention, by China and Russia. So we are seeing now a strategic alignment of China and Russia with North Korea, which is related, I believe, now with the Ukraine situation and all that is implicated for the international relations. I don't believe that this necessarily would be, or this means that China and Russia will support in every single way North Korea. I don't see this happening, but I will see that if the North Korean issue can function as an instrument to deal or to confront the United States, then it will be used by China and Russia. The same case with the United States vis-a-vis China and Russia. Finally, there is some comment I would like to make about the importance or the implications of this turning or returning of the regime to the military policy. The implications for Latin America, I mean, because this is something perhaps we have not mentioned, and I believe there is evidence that the North Korean issue impacts and has an influence sometimes for the Latin American countries' foreign policies. I am thinking about, for instance, what happened in 2017 as an example of this. You remember we saw a North Korea nuclear test in that year. And what happened at the time is that the Brazilian and the Mexican government made some comments as part of their foreign policies and foreign goals about the North Korea situation. In the cases of the Brazilian government, they condemned North Korea launching of the test. In the case of the Mexican government, they went even further. They declared, if you recall, the resident North Korean ambassador at the time, Kim Hyong-gil, persona non grata, and gave him 22 hours to leave the embassy and get out of Mexico, which had an impact for the North Korean-Mexico diplomatic relations. I believe that observing this will make us assume that discussing North Korea is not only a matter of trying to understand what makes the country, survive to this century, but also is a strategy that we can take into account for the Latin American countries in order to prepare for the possible impacts that the North Korean policies may have in the Latin American foreign policies as well. The more prepared we are, the better, I believe, we will deal with any changes in the North Korean regime. I think I will stop here to give time to questions and perhaps to continue the conversation. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Eduardo, Professor Tadeo. To start this discussion, to put so much meat on the table, and let's have. I will give Professor Fiori a few minutes for the comments about Tadeo's work, and after we are waiting for the question. We are receiving a few questions, and in 20 minutes more or less we end this conference. Thank you, Professor Fiori.
Thank you. Thank you, Filippo. Wow, thanks a lot, Eduardo. Apart from the fact that actually you gave so many comments, and I must say, actually, most of them are very difficult to reply. I will go random, so because there's so many things actually. Yeah, I will start from the end, which is not, the connection North America, Latin America, North Korea, because basically, I'm very unexperienced on that. But actually, I really liked your comment, which is, eventually global. It has global validity, if you want, and actually I liked it very, very much. If actually you want to start from the what you call strategic alignment, yes, that is something we are studying at the moment. I am studying at the moment, because we need to understand. Look, to tell you the truth, actually, I do not want to participate, and I never participate actually to this debate
where China experts or America experts actually lose their time, according to me at least, lose their time actually debating on the possibility that China wants or eventually or will participate to the deconstruction of the so-called international global order and the reconstruction of a new global order, because I don't see actually that point. I don't think that China wants to do that. China is too happy to live in this international order that actually was established in the wake of the Second World War, because this international order actually is the one that China fits in. I mean, they want to they are always trying to find some adjustments in the order, but actually it would be way difficult for China eventually to rebuild the international order from scratch. But this is not important. What is important is what you said, the fact that for the first time, actually, the UNSC, of course, actually ignited by the United States, asked to implement new sanctions, and for the first time, actually, China and Russia said no. No. But this was pretty much understandable in a way. Sanctions, I've written a couple of things on that. And I know the point, but actually, if you want to read somebody who is much more prepared than me on sanctions, actually, the book Daniel Dresner wrote on sanctions was probably the Bible. And actually, he explains very well why sanctions are not the right way to follow. What we are doing, if we want to talk on the specific case, actually, I know that what sanctions are doing to North Korea is eventually not absolutely touching the regime, but the repercussions of sanctions are on the population. This is what we're talking about. We see it. If you go to North Korea, actually, you can see it very, very clearly. People who live in Pyongyang, and of course, actually, I have no experience with the leadership, but I'm sure that the regime is eventually absolutely not touched by that. I'm pretty sure that eventually Kim Jong-un is still importing, alcohol from whatever country in the West. And eventually, those who are suffering are normal citizens, not in Pyongyang, because you don't see them actually suffering in Pyongyang, because we are talking about a very small portion of the population who can live in Pyongyang. But if you go to the countryside, actually, the conditions there are awful, tremendous, traumatic. This is. I'm not implying that sanctions only actually created those conditions, because the regime made its part in creating those conditions, but actually sanctions are eventually totally useless. Apart from these, a couple of things I would like to say. Eduardo, thank you very much for the generous words that you had towards my approach. Now, a few years ago, actually, this is public and it's being recorded, so probably it's not, but, eventually, a few years ago, actually, I was invited by the South Korean embassy here, and I had, this very nice conversation with people. They are always try to have, very good relations with South Koreans officers. On top of that, actually, I've always been funded by South Koreans. I am grateful to South Koreans. My life wouldn't be the same without South Korea. So, and they know that. But, because I am so critic And at that time, actually, I criticized Park Geun-hye's attitude towards North Korea and the trust politique, actually. At a certain point, they decided they didn't want to talk to me anymore, okay? But I always try, actually, to, to defend my ideas. And my ideas are very clear. And eventually, what I think is that the North Korean regime is a regime. It's not a paradise. I'm not actually the one defending the regime, but actually, and if only, a very small percentage of what defectors tell us about the life in North Korea is true, that is a nightmare. Okay, that's what I say. And I'm not actually a friend of Kim Jong-un. I have no interest whatsoever in defending the regime. I would like to be very clear on this. But actually, I do think that eventually we need, from the political point of view, we need to study North Korea as we study every other dictatorship in the world. We do not need, and this is absolutely unacceptable in a sense. We do not need to ridiculize North Korea. I have never called Kim Jong-un the fat leader because this is, it can be fat, but this actually from the political point of view is absolutely meaningless. I have never called, I've never used expression or adjectives that actually my colleagues use. I tend to be very, very schematic and very clear when I study North Korea, and I study it from the political point of view. And on top of that, actually, I am one of the few who tends to study North Korea from the domestic point of view. It basically means I'm very interested in the, in how the machine works, domestically speaking. That's why, unfortunately, I have to spend part of my day, reading the KCNA, reading the Nodong Shinmun, which are actually, sometimes they make me laugh, okay? Because it's propaganda, of course. And when, you are the expert in communication, so I have nothing to teach you on these, actually. When, a regime works with propaganda, you discover few things. When I was writing my second book on North Korea, I discovered that actually there was something related to Italy in the KCNA on a specific day, which has never existed. Okay, so we're talking about propaganda, but actually, this is how dictatorships works. So we need to be very, very, very honest when we deal with North Korea. And of course, I really hate when people attack me saying it's not your case, of course, but actually I have lived all of my life actually being attacked by journalists who know nothing about North Korea, but they tend to attack me just because I seem to be the one defending the regime, which I'm not. But I try to be very scientific when actually I deal with this country. And of course, actually, one of the things that basically I was maintaining, I was stating, you were very, very precise on these, is when you talked about the improved status of North Korea. That is actually, a demonstration of what actually I tend to say. It's not the improved status. It is not that actually that I was talking about. It was more. It's more subtle in a way. What I'm implying is basically that a country that has nukes, that has a very, very advanced nuclear program, a country which uses ICBMs, a country which launches missiles, actually has been viewed by the international community as a threat, but actually, and this is international relations, this is pure international relations theory. We need to talk about the price to pay. Is it more convenient to pay the price according to which actually Seoul can eventually be destroyed, or, you know, parts of Seoul can be destroyed and eventually millions of people, thousands of people can die, or it is better actually to pay the price to negotiate with North Korea? That basically implies having the president of the United States of America being seated at the same table with a dictator. Because actually this is, you know, what we need to talk about, okay, what we need to understand. So what I think is that actually Kim Jong-un has, you know, has actually adopted a strategy that has paid off, okay, that, you know, a very, very, how to say, advantageous strategy, because he has forced in a certain way. He has not, you know, he has not actually decided to leave his strategy aside. At the same time, he has forced the United States and significantly the president of the United States to sit with him at the same table equally. This is kind of, you know, very, 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 how to say, brave, exceptionally done. And again, I do not want actually the audience to, you know, I'm not exaggerating with adjectives because actually I like Kim Jong-un or North Korea. What I'm saying is that the strategy they have played is something that eventually we need to take into consideration, because they are eventually playing the good strategy according to them, according to the vision of the world they have. Okay. The family leadership, yeah. When you talk about Kim Yo-jong, actually, I do totally agree with you. Kim Yo-jong, you know, I'm not sure she will be the next leader, but I don't even know why we should be talking. And again, it's not against you, but against, you know, many commentators who periodically talk about Kim Jong-un being dead, and, you know, who succeeds Kim Jong-un? I mean, Kim Jong-un is very young, and even if he's affected by several diseases, actually, I don't know why we should speculate on his death and, you know, who can be the successor. I'm not sure, actually, Kim Yo-jong can be the successor. Because of a number of reasons that, of course, you know much better than me, probably. She is a woman. We have never had, actually, a woman leading the North Korean regime. So we need to understand if a woman can lead the North Korean regime. She is very young. She is not, you know, totally unexperienced, as you remarked, because she has, you know, had the possibility to be involved in few political actions, but, you know, we'll need to understand how it develops, and many other things, actually, many other things. I don't know if you have questions. Otherwise, I can go on.
Yeah, we just to put some more questions from the public. We have 2 questions, actually. So we read it for you. And because we are out of time, and we can give you 10 minutes most, and in 10 minutes we have to close.
Okay.
The first question is, how did Kim Jong-un manage the pandemic crisis in terms
Okay, yeah, I can read it. Okay, I can read it. Filippo.
first,
Oh my God, this is...
I can
Right, yeah, sure.
read both of
The
them.
second.
The second is a bit long. As Professor Fiori explained previously, inside Kim Jong-un promised people first and improving people's living condition. He is on pressure with that. At the same time, there is a new South Korean president, Yoon Suk-yeol, who is conservative, has argued together with President Biden that they will definitely ask North Korea for addressing human rights and humanitarian crisis in the future negotiation. So now Kim Jong-un has pressure regarding its people living condition from the inside and the outside. Which are the future scenarios for this? How will Kim Jong-un embrace this context?
Okay, I will try. Filippo, this is a very timing questions, very timingly question, actually. How did Kim Jong-un manage the pandemic crisis? He has decided basically not to manage the pandemic crisis, or actually not in the, in the Western style. They are not accepting any help. Actually, the United States, South Korea, the international community through the COVAX have tried to offer help, to offer support to North Korea. They didn't even reply. And it's easy to understand, actually, as far as I know North Korea. Eventually, if you provide vaccines, the provision of vaccines brought with it some kind of, tracing, if you want, okay? That is, you need to involve international doctors, and we are not sure that eventually North Korean doctors or North Korean specialists are prepared to manage the provision of vaccines to a population of 24 million people. And they do not want, actually, anybody to have access to the country in this moment. So they do not want to be controlled, if you want. And on top of that, actually, what we do suspect, and this is probably the best explanation I can give you, is that all the data that they are giving us are totally false, totally fabricated. Because it's easy. I'm not actually explaining here technicalities, but actually a country which has no vaccines, and basically 99% of the population is not vaccinated against COVID-19. This basically means that it's incredible that actually you have less than 70 people there. Okay, it's not credible. It's actually, less than 70 deaths is something that nobody takes seriously into account. So possibly the fact that they do not want any help also, depends on these. What we know is actually they are talking with China, and possibly they have already accepted some provision of Sinovac, or they are waiting for China to provide some doses of Sinovac. Okay. On top of that, actually, you need to take into consideration the fact that the healthcare system is very precarious. I'm not saying actually the healthcare system in South Korea, does not work, because this is false. They have a healthcare system. It works. The point is actually they have no machineries. And, when you have no machineries, actually, the healthcare system, cannot do more than it already does. Okay, doctors are very good, actually. but they do not have machineries, and this is a limit, okay? From the social point of view, I don't think, as other scholars have suggested, that eventually COVID can be a threat for the stability of the regime. It is not. If you look at what happened between 1994 and 1995, that was a dramatic period. That was the period when, according to Haggard and Marcus Noland, actually, between the 2% and the 4% of the total population of North Korea died of starvation. Okay, that was a global disaster. That was a massive, dramatic event. Okay, in that moment, actually, nobody, you know, there were no signs of riots or revolts against Kim Jong-il. Okay, and nowadays the situation is much easier than the situation that North Korea experienced in the mid-90s. So I don't think that there will be any turmoil because of the COVID-19. The second point, the second question. Future scenarios. Look, this is a very difficult question, but it's probably easier to reply if compared to the so many questions that Eduardo posed me. This is a very difficult question. What I can tell you is that when we talk about people first, and actually, I mean, you are suggesting a good point. That is, Kim Jong-un is pressured. Kim Jong-un is never pressured. Is never pressured because he can't be pressured. He is the leader. Okay, he can't be pressured from the bottom. That is, society cannot pressure him. Okay, he has made some promises to the people, and he probably feels honestly obliged to his people in eventually improving their conditions. Okay, but he's not pressured, and he actually, at a certain point, as it has happened in the past, can go in front of his people saying, look, I was not able to make any substantial economic reform, and implicitly this means I was not able to improve your personal conditions because they are bad. Those who are there outside the United States, the international community, South Korea, they are bad. And so since they are bad, actually, I need to focus on them in order to preserve the country we live in. Okay, so if I postpone economic reforms, actually, it's because of them. Okay, so the target must not be me. I am defending the state from them. This is propaganda that they always use, that the leadership has always used. Okay, on the other side, actually, you're talking about, and you're mentioning the fact that there's a kind of new ticket between the new South Korean president Yoon Suk-yeol and the president of the United States, the old Joe Biden. Okay, there's a ticket. Yeah, I mean, they are actually Yoon. I'm not sure. I mean, that was kind of very ironic to me, actually. Biden went to South Korea, and during the United States anthem, actually, Yoon Suk-yeol put his hand on his heart. like, you know, the anthem of the United States was his own anthem, which was, you know, very much criticized in South Korea, which is a very nationalistic country, okay? But apart from these, actually, there's a ticket, but, you know, I don't know what's the name of the person who is asking this question, but believe me, the ticket, actually, we need to tell it very honestly. When, you know, they are not talking about human rights condition. They are not talking about the conditions of North Koreans in North Korea. They are not talking about humanitarian crisis. They are only talking about the dismantlement of the arsenal. This is the only thing that Americans have in mind. And nowadays, along with Americans, also South Koreans. That's why, actually, when I'm asked to give, you know, recipes on North Koreans, you know, on North Korea, they do not like the recipe that I've always given them. That is, you know, abandon this, you know, CVID kind of recipe that is complete, irreversible, verifiable dismantlement. This is the recipe of the Americans. Actually, we have seen that this is a failure. We need to address the issue from a different point of view, from a different perspective, trying to, you know, get them to the table, negotiate with them, having a dialogue with them. And if they do not want to talk on their arsenal, well, let's talk about something else. The point with North Korea in the last, you know, let's say four decades has been that we have focused on the nuclear arsenal. Nukes actually are, of course, dangerous, but they are not using them as an offensive measure, and they are not so crazy to use nukes in order to attack the United States. They are North Koreans. They are not stupid. North Koreans, not stupid, okay? They belong to North Korea. They do not belong to, you know, stupid land.
Thank you so much, Professor. I will give last 2-3 minutes at most, because we are totally running out of time, to Professor Tadeo to a last comment, last words.
Yeah, probably I will just take 1 minute, because I believe Professor Fiori has explained, answered really well, detailing the questions posed at him. Well, first of all, I would like to say that this critical approach that Professor Fiori mentions on North Korea is something that we embrace, for instance, in this group I belong to, that is the Mexican Circle on North Korea and on Korean studies, actually. We try to move forward the idea that we need to talk about different Koreas and study North Korea as a state that has constructed its regime, the internal logics, even its national identity, and so on, right? And it also acts as a state in the international sphere. But based on that, my perspective is that in order to understand what might be this possible future of North Korea, we need, just like in any other case when studying another state, to continue observing what are the main drivers of the country. And for that, I believe we need a constant and very attentive observation of the country, right? Not only to pay attention to North Korea whenever there is a crisis to come to a conclusions, but just as Professor Fiori has mentioned, to systematically try to see where the changes are taking place and where those changes are not taking place. Certainly, I believe that North Korea will be still seen from this exotic perspective. Is going to be seen as a threat. That's not going to change soon internationally. That's a clear continuity of this debate. But now I believe that with this conference we have heard today, you have other elements to also think critically about the possible change of the North Korean regime. I just will leave it there, Filippo, and I am really thankful for this opportunity and for having also the possibility to have this conversation with Professor Antonio Fiori. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Tadeo. Before saying goodbye to our guests, I would like to remind you and share, if I can, wait a second, our call for papers for the Journal of Asian Studies that we are organizing here. We dedicate a brief section of the third volume of the RIA about women studies, equity, and equality in Korea and in East Asia. Of course, we are also receiving any kind of topics in any time. So hope to receive a lot of research papers. And now, thank you, Professor Antonio Fiori. Thank you, Professor Eduardo Tadeo. And we end here and have a great summer. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Eduardo. Thank you, Filippo.